1. I am an adult female. When I was a small child, about 6 or 7, my Persian had a litter of cats. Most were grey or cream, but one was coal-black, fluffy, very playful with me, and cute as a button. One night I woke up about 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. It was really cold, so when I came out, I saw my black kitten playing with a plastic trash bag. So, I decided to pick it up and take it to bed with me for company to keep me warm. I reached down to pick it up, and my hand passed straight through it. I felt like I'd put my hand in the refrigerator when my hand passed through its body. I stepped back, scared, and could only stare as the kitten continued to prance and play around, and, to my amazement, pass through the trash bag, as if the bag wasn't even there. I took my ass back to bed fast, literally jumping under the covers and pulling them over my head. I lay there hiding under the covers, scared off my ass, but eventually I fell asleep. The next morning I get out of bed to get ready for school. My parents are already up. My mother looks sad. She tells me that one of the kittens had died sometime in the night. She turned and picked up a small towel-covered bundle and very gently unwrapped it, and there on the towel lay my little black kitten. 2. I am a 46-year-old female in California. When I was in my 20s, I took night classes at a community college, art mostly, because I am a semi-professional artist and was trying to hone my skills. But I digress. My husband Rick would pick me up after class because I, A, didn't want to try to find parking outside of campus, always horrible day or night, and B, permits for the school parking lot were expensive, and the lot itself was isolated and had a history of muggings and one assault, especially at night. So my Rick would come and get me at 9 p.m. when I finished class. Since there were no low windows to see out of on the ground floor, I would wait outside under a light pole. One night Rick was running late. I was cold and tired and starting to get annoyed. When I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand at attention, I whirled around and found a guy slowly creeping up on me. He was taller than me. I'm 5'6", ex-dancer who is 130 pounds, mostly muscle, and thin, Hispanic mix with oily hair, dark pants and shirt, with a black Dickies jacket from the 80s and dark eyes. He froze when I turned, him wild-eyed to the point the whites of his eyes showed even in the dark. We locked gazes. I saw a hunger there, a need, and a whole lot of crazy, and I knew deep in my gut what he wanted. It scared the shit out of me. If I hadn't turned around, he would have definitely tried to jump me and drag me off somewhere. Usually when I got scared, that translates to anger, and this dude had seriously pissed me off. I faced him, legs apart, my hand in the pocket of my trench coat, where I gripped a dagger I always carried with me when I went out, and glared at him. He looked at me, his breathing fast, like he'd just finished running, and his eyes stood there, continuing to glare, my heart racing. Would he attack? Would I be forced to stab his crazy ass? I hadn't pulled my dagger out, partly because I knew he had no idea what was in my pocket, and because the campus police were dicks. No words were spoken, but he definitely got the message because he turned around and slunk off into the dark. I waited until I was sure he was gone before sagging with relief. My husband showed up a few minutes later, not even apologizing for being 25 minutes late. I told him what happened, bitching at him for leaving me hanging so long. A week later, I heard that some dude fitting his description attacked a woman, smaller and shorter than me, near the Arts Extension building. Luckily, she just happened to be a 4th-degree black belt, and after giving her a black eye, she gave him a broken arm, 3 broken ribs, a dislocated knee, and a concussion. I found out he was a registered sex offender who had been released a few months back. He was not supposed to be anywhere near a school, let alone on campus. He went to jail for violating the conditions of his parole. But for how long, I don't know. So, creepy campus ex-con rapist, let's not meet again, because if we do, you will be picking up your teeth with broken fingers. 3. I know it might sound cliché that something scary happened on Halloween, but it really did. I'm a 16-year-old female. I live in a small town a little ways from New York City. And when I mean small town, I mean we have one long block with shops along it, and off of that street, many other small, tiny streets with houses on them. For having such a small community, there are many houses which in turn are abandoned due to there not being a lot of people. We have one Motel 6 right next to the highway exit, and that's where the very few business people and travelers stay. I live in a dead-end street, with a swarm of trees at the end that stretched back a mile or two until you hit the highway. My house was the last house right next to those woods. When I was younger, my dad would take me and our German Shepherd at the time into the woods. I distinctly remember he'd always bring his gun and would never let me out of eyesight. Not that he would need a gun. There had never been a need for one besides scaring off the coyotes that wandered into our backyard after our cats. But my dad had been in the military and had told me that one could never be too prepared. Anyway, after school yesterday, I decided to go home and take a nap before heading out with friends. And yes, I still trick-or-treat. Who can resist the urge of free candy? So I got home, grabbed something to eat quickly, and went upstairs to sleep for an hour or two. Well, I ended up sleeping until 8:30. I had 4 messages from my best friend, and 6 missed phone calls. I called my friend back, and she didn't answer. I wanted to cry. I had missed Halloween. But I at least wanted some candy to enjoy that night, so I decided to go out alone and maybe I would stumble across my friends. I did mention it was an extremely small town. I didn't have time to put on my gangsta Dora the Explorer costume, and just left the house in clothes I wore to school that day, and a green pillowcase for my candy. I walked down my street, hands balled up in my pockets, with my face turned down, looking at my shoes. I didn't stop at any of my neighbors' houses because either their lights were off or no one lived there. I stopped at 2 houses on my street and got 2 pieces of shit candy. I knew just to pass the last house because, once again, no one had lived there for nearly 5 years. The same hunt sign was still stuck into the ankle-high grass. Of course, after 5 years, it was just a faded sign with curse words drawn all over it. No realtor even came around to check on the house trying to sell it. They just didn't even bother showing up to take that sign down. That house would probably stay empty. That's why I perked up a little as I glanced over and saw the porch light on, and gasped a little as I saw an older lady sitting on the second step holding a big orange bowl of candy. I honestly stopped for a second, bewildered, and stared. The woman smiled at me and waved a crooked hand at me. I hadn't realized that house had electricity, let alone tenants. I guess her smile had been kind enough, but something told me to just keep going. Don't stay around that house any longer. Though for some reason I couldn't move. I'd always been very cautious. Starting at a young age, I would ask my parents thousands of questions a day. And after a few they'd get annoyed and give me something to do. That's why I couldn't move. Too many questions had built up in my head. And they weren't far from spilling out when the woman spoke. "Do you want some candy, girl?" she asked. I visibly jumped, and she laughed. A high-pitched laugh that I couldn't detect any humor in. "Well, come on over, girl. You can have the whole bowl if you like." she said, leaning forward a bit so her face fell out of the light and was only a shadow. I don't know why I did this, but I carefully made my way over to her. I stopped a foot or so away from her, and I took a better look. She was pale with what I'd describe as lumps on her arms, legs, and one side of her cheek. Her eyes, though, were unusually large and blue, so blue I could feel her icy gaze looking me up and down. Her hair was long and thin. She wore a long white nightgown that she had bunched up at her knees. It was completely filthy. She had no shoes or socks on, despite the freezing temperature. She now had the bowl hugged against her so I couldn't see into it. There was also a sickening smell I could detect now that I was closer to her. "Where's the candy, ma'am?" I asked, trying to be polite and opening my bag. I started breathing out of my mouth. That was almost worse. "Be patient, girl. Do you like tricks or treats?" she asked, and I was surprised. What the fuck was she talking about? I swallowed and replied, "Treats, please, ma'am." Her face hardened, and she stood up. "I'm all out of treats, girl," she said, almost sounding disappointed. "Come into my house and we'll get you some." I did not want to follow this creepy-looking woman into that house, but my curious side washed over me. What was it like in that house? And maybe, if it were you, that would be the last of your questions, but if you could see this house, it was Victorian style, with 3 levels. If I closed my eyes, I could almost see it in its good days. So cautiously I followed the lady inside, but instead of turning around on the step to use the front door, she scurried past me and around to the back. I wondered if she was going to a back door, so I followed slowly. She was hunched over, waiting for me beside a glass door, only there was no glass. Broken shards of glass lay around the patio and a few feet away in the soil. I saw a rock. Did this lady even live here? I asked myself as she stepped over the threshold and continued into the house. I shook it off, that she must have locked herself out or something. But I was aware of my surroundings now. Now more than ever. There were no lights on inside the house. Furniture was tipped over and covered with plastic. Everything was dusty. By the time we reached the kitchen, I knew that whoever this woman was, she did not live in this house. She set the bowl on a broken table with only 3 legs. I was amazed at how it was still standing. "Stay right here, girl. I'll be back with your candy," she said, and waddled away into one of those large pantries. I relaxed a bit. Maybe she really was just getting me some candy. I glanced around the kitchen, and my eyes landed on the dishwasher. It had been installed recently. Well, as recent as the last owners had been there. It clearly wasn't part of the era that the house was from. I walked around the counter and opened it up. I jumped back with a scream when a dead cat fell out onto the kitchen floor. The poor thing had obviously been tortured, because if it wasn't for the tail and the 1 foot it had left, I never would have been able to tell. The woman came back seconds later and smiled. Her teeth were yellow. "Oh, thank you, girl. You found my kitty," she said enthusiastically, and she bent over and picked up the mangled corpse. I promise you I nearly threw up. My hand flew to my mouth, and she scrubbed the cat against her face, trying to imitate a cat's purring. I choked on my puke and backed away slowly from the woman. Before I fled that house, she turned slowly, and her face grew serious. "You're lucky you didn't pick Trick," she said, and I burst out of that house so fast. I swear I burned holes in my sneakers running home. I locked all my doors and grabbed my dad's gun from where he kept it in his closet. I slid under my bed and laid there crying all night until my dad got home from his Halloween party a couple hours later. I told him everything, and my mom held me as my dad stormed out of the house with his gun. He came back 20 minutes later with a disgusted look on his face. He didn't say anything to us, he just called the police. Mom and Dad went outside to talk to the cops, and I listened. Dad would have never told me, and I had to know. After my dad had gone back there, he entered the house through the back door, gun raised. He heard a woman's laughter coming from the kitchen and followed it. He found the woman sitting in the floor, her wrists slit, laughing. The cat sat on her lap. My dad didn't say anything. Didn't call the cops to come and help her. He just stood there as that woman died, and that scared me too. He came home after burying the cat and called the police. The cops said no one lives there. No one should have been in there. They guessed she was probably just a homeless woman who had been living in those woods, seeing as no one recognized her, and as I said before, it was a small town. Literally everyone knew everyone. I stayed home from school today. I had the worst nightmare last night, and I got no sleep. I just kept hearing her voice saying I was lucky I didn't pick Trick. What else did she have planned if I had picked Trick? Which I would never have done. Was she really getting me candy? She was in there longer than that should have took, and came out empty-handed. What did she kill herself with? Dad said there was no knife lying around. Why was she just sitting there? Was there ever any candy in that bowl? Did she just use that to lure people to her? What would she have done if a young kid was alone? Would she have done the same to them or worse? Remember how I told you I always had a lot of questions? Yeah, so that's it. I got 2 pieces of candy and freaked out by a crazy woman in a disgusting nightgown. Happy fucking Halloween, everyone. 4. I'm a male. When I was 19 years old, I had a 1-year baby boy who I took care of by myself because his mother wasn't around. I also had a best friend who lived only 1 block away from my house. And he had just had a baby as well. It was about 9:30 at night, and my baby was not falling asleep, so I was bored and decided to walk to my friend's house and say hi. I bundled my baby up inside my sweater and zipped it up with him facing my chest, so it was impossible for him to see in the dark, and I started walking. Between my house and his house is a small park trailer that was notorious for having a Norteno gang population living there. I was aware of this, but my walk was only a 1-block distance, so I wasn't really worried. I got to my friend's house and we hung out for a little while until my baby finally started getting sleepy. So I decided it was time to walk back home. It was about 10 at night at this point, and really dark and cold, as it had just reached the winter season. I bundled my baby back up into my sweater and started my walk back to my house. I'm a scrawny white boy who has been picked on and mugged and jumped and beat up by gangsters in my town several times before. So it only takes me seeing one of them for my anxiety to start kicking into panic. I saw 4 of them standing on the sidewalk in front of the trailer park in my direct path to my house. I started to get very nervous because I could only see silhouettes of them. So I decided to cross the street to walk past them on the other side of the street, but as I did this, I noticed 2 of them copying my exact movements, but in my direction. The other 2 men paced around where they were, as if they were keeping watch or standing by in case I tried to run from them. That's when I knew they had bad intentions, and they were after me specifically. I honestly didn't know what I was going to do, or what I could even do. I just gripped my baby tight and looked down at him. He looked up at me with dreary eyes, halfway asleep. I prayed to myself and wished that I'd never decided to take this walk to begin with. The 2 men got closer and I walked faster. but the way they were walking would intercept my path no matter where I tried to go. I knew I wouldn't be able to run with my baby inside my shirt. I was fucked. What were they going to do? What was I going to do? The men approached me without speaking a word. They started laughing loudly, and then they looked down to see my baby's head barely poking out of the top of my sweater. They simply turned around 180 degrees and walked back to where they came from without a word. Then they all disappeared back into the shadows. I cannot tell you how relieved I felt. The sigh of relief I let out was so heartfelt and sincere. I cannot describe with words how good it felt. I walked home much faster and decided that would be the last of my late-night walks, especially with my baby. After that, I had the most confusing emotions running through my head. I was so grateful and in a very weird way. I respected the gangsters for what they decided to do when confronted with the fact that their victim was carrying a baby. Either they feared that mugging or hurting someone with a baby would result in much bigger consequences than they were wanting, or they actually had some heart in there somewhere deep down. At least one of them must be parents themselves or came from a loving family. I don't know, but seriously, fuck those guys for doing what they do to innocent people. And thank those guys for having some level of decency in their souls. Either way, let's not meet again. 5. One day I planned to meet up with my friends at the park. This town is known as a dangerous place to be at night, but usually safe during the day. On my way towards the park, I got stopped by a French-speaking older man. I live in Belgium, so it's not uncommon for people to speak French here. So this man asked me if I could help him find somewhere. I'm a very friendly person, so I told him that I'd try my best because my French isn't the greatest. To give me a description of who he was looking for, he pulled out a picture from his bag. To my surprise, it was a fucking nude picture from a porn magazine. Obviously, I don't know the woman in the picture, so I kindly told him I couldn't help him. As I proceeded to walk away, he stopped me asking if he could give me a kiss. At this point, I was very disgusted and creeped out, so I gave him a weird face and told him no. While I continued my walk towards the park, I sent my ex a text, telling him that I just encountered the creepiest guy ever. I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings because I thought this guy would be too ashamed to be walking around anymore. To my surprise, while I crossed the road and looked back, I saw him riding slowly on his bike behind me. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I called my friends who were waiting for me in the park, telling them to go to the entrance so I wouldn't have to go through a street that isn't busy. Obviously, they couldn't understand me because I was pretty much crying. Then I moved to plan B. I was thinking who lived close by so I could be somewhere safe really quickly. I thought of a plan. I would turn the corner and run to one of my friend's house, who lived nearby, as fast as I can, and hope she was home. When I got to my friend's doorstep and looked behind me, the creepy old man was still lurking on his bike. I didn't even greet my friend before I rushed into her house and slammed her door shut. I began hyperventilating and having an asthma attack. I couldn't believe that someone is capable of such things. After that, my friends from the park came to my other friend's house and walked with me to the park where I calmed down and could finally enjoy the rest of my day. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here. And thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, Episode 20. Of course, I would like to say big thanks to everyone who allowed me to use their stories. Without you guys, these videos don't happen, and without you guys, some of the other videos don't happen either. So I'm always very, very grateful to each and every one of you. I'm actually having to record this video and tomorrow's video a bit earlier than I planned, because I don't think I'm going to get much sleep going into the following day. The reason for that is I have people coming, and I'm sure they'll be here very early in the morning, to erect scaffolding around my house or near my house or whatever. I'm not entirely sure what it's for. I just got a letter through the door. I'm hoping it's to repair the roof, because they seem to be doing roofs in my neighbourhood, replacing them, the tiling and making repairs. So I'm hoping that's what it is, because I need to report mine anyway, because there's a little bit of a leak. So if that's what they're doing, that'd be wonderful, because it'll save me the task of having to get it sorted. But it does mean there's going to be a lot of hammering and banging. And given that I'm a night person, I work through the night because I've been a night person for years. My previous job, I worked at night, so it was quite conducive for that. I could come home and just spend my nights in front of the computer, just relaxing, or when I started doing this, making videos. And now I record through the night, which is generally fine. It just means I sleep through the day, then I get up a little later, and I go do what I've got to do. If I have to go shopping, I go do that, or whatever else. If I have to go see people, family or whatever, I do that. Then I come home and I lounge about for a bit, and then once it's a bit later, I start recording, partly because it's generally quieter at night. I find it's much better for that. That's really the main reason. But again, also, I'm a nighttime person. It's what I prefer. But I'm probably going to be too tired to actually make videos today. Because I'll be too tired to actually give a good performance with the recording. So I'm doing just getting the audio recorded now, so that I'll get whatever sleep I can, and then when I wake up, I just have to edit and make the videos, because I can do that when I'm sleepy, because I've done that before. Okay, I'm going to stop chewing your ears now and head off. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.